So we've talked about in the past how when we're studying God's Word, we can look at it, we tend to, because we are people, fallen people, we tend to look at it in a self-centered way. We look at the circumstances and think about our feelings, how it applies to us, how we would feel, and whether it is pleasing or displeasing to us. And put things in a category according to our rankings. This is good, this is bad, this is favorable, this is unfavorable, based on our judgment and our feeling. Rather than look at what Jesus is doing in every single circumstance and make our judgment from that. We see here, last week we talked about the Transfiguration, where Jesus is on the mountaintop, and he shows his godhood to his few select disciples, Peter, James, and John. It's this wonderful mountaintop experience. We even have that expression in Christianity, where it's just awesome. The disciples are doing nothing, and they get to see the glory of God. We have those sort of experiences in our walk with Jesus at times, where we're doing very little, and we know that Jesus is there. It might be a point where someone close to us gets saved. It might be a point where we're at a retreat, and Jesus is just there. The worship was awesome. We're like, yes, we're on the mountaintop. But then we come back home, or we then go out the next day, or go to work the next day, and everything is falling apart. Things are exploding. Jesus could come down in today's passage and meet a demon-possessed boy. And we think, everything's terrible. Why did I lose the mountaintop? But that's our eyes judging and characterizing, rather than what Jesus is showing us in the last few weeks of our study. We go on the mountaintop to be charged up in God's glory, to go into the valley, not to be defeated, not to have it stolen from us, but to bring his glory there and to see his glory just in a different setting. We've talked about the last few weeks how Jesus gives us the formula for an abundant, powerful life in Christ. But it's not the formula that our flesh wants. Our flesh wants glory. Our flesh wants ease. Our flesh wants whatever our flesh wants. Candy. Just mentioned that a moment ago. But he says, no. Deny yourself. It starts with saying no to yourself. Remember, we talked about how that the word deny is completely forsake, completely disown. I do not know that man. And then take up your cross. The cross is painful. The cross means death to self. And follow me. When you think about that last part, that's supposed to be, it seems like the easy part. Okay, follow Jesus. But what did Jesus do? He completely disowned himself, his godhood, everything he was entitled to, and died a miserable death on the cross for people who did not deserve it. That's the formula. And we saw that leads, the good news, the awesome news, the great news, is that leads to the cross and then the resurrection. That leads to the transfiguration. That leads to glory. But the process is also often not going to be painless, because our flesh goes down fighting. Our flesh wants control. So we're going to look at the fact that Jesus comes off a mountain and goes into a valley and is confronted by a demon. But I think this is not a story of something getting taken away. It is a pattern for us. We're like cordless tools. We get charged up not to just sit there in the tool on the tool rack charged. We get charged up so that we can go out and fix things, and go out and be used, and go out to and expend ourselves, and then go back and get charged up again. So we left off last week at the end of the Transfiguration. Jesus gives us a view of his second coming at the Transfiguration. He's coming in glory. And even those who knew him best in this world never understood quite how glorious Jesus is. Jesus is our friend, he's our buddy, he's our mediator. But he's also the one who sits on the throne of heaven and earth and holds all of the universe together. That Jesus loves you, loves me. That Jesus gave up his power and his honor and his glory that has been in existence since the beginning of time and will be through all eternity, to die for each of us, just because he loves us. And he shows his glory. He shows his disciples what is going on. And as they're coming down on the mountain, his disciples are like us. And verse 10 says, "And his disciples asked him, saying, 'Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?'" They still have questions. They've just seen God's glory. They've just heard God speak from heaven. They know Jesus is who he says he is, but they're still confused. And they have a valid question. In the book of Malachi, the last book before the New Testament, the last Old Testament book, in chapter 4, there's a prophecy about a prophet to come. And in Malachi 4:5, it says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." So they read that verse, they're familiar with it, those verses, and they thought, okay, Jesus is God, he's here, so what about Elijah? Malachi says Elijah's coming. And they ask Jesus, which is, we take for granted that, but they've just seen God's glory. God has just spoken to them from heaven saying, listen to him. Essentially, be quiet and listen to him. And yet they still ask questions. And Jesus, how does he respond? Does he do the great and powerful Oz? Everybody seen Wizard of Oz? You know, the scene with the big head? How dare you ask questions? How? They've just seen him transfigured. And they're still like, I don't understand. I don't get it. But Jesus is patient. He's patient when we ask true questions, honest questions, because he is God and we are not. He is perfect and we are not. He is all-knowing and we are not. So he's always teaching. He's always saying, just come to me. Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden. I'll give you rest. There's nothing to fear from me. And last week we talked about how they're on their faces in fear, and Jesus reaches out to them and picks them up. That's his job. If you are struggling with something in your faith, if you are struggling with something in your life, your faith is fine, but the reality of your life is not lining up with what you think it should be. Take it to the Lord. Lord, I don't understand. He might not give you the reason something's going on, but he will give you the comfort and the fellowship with him to get through it? And he answers them in this case. He tells us to ask and seek and knock, and we will find an answer. Verse 11 says, Jesus answered and said to them, "Indeed, Elijah is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. So Jesus establishes that Elijah he's talking about the spirit of Elijah, the prophet. And John the Baptist has fulfilled that in his first coming. If you go back to Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says the same thing in 11:14, and I can just read it. "And if you are willing to receive it, he, John the Baptist, is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." So God had set out the prophecy that Elijah was coming, and he fulfilled it through John the Baptist, who went before him and turned the hearts of children to their father and made ready the way of the Lord. He was his herald for his first coming. But I think also there's an interesting thing in coming for us in the book of Revelation. John the Baptist fulfilled the prophecy about Elijah in his first coming. But if you go to Revelation chapter 11, at the tribulation period, before Jesus comes in his second coming to make all things right, to fulfill all of the prophecies, to bring the end of all things, there's two witnesses who come. And it's Revelation chapter 11, starting in verse 2, about halfway through. 3. "And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth." This is right at the beginning of the tribulation, when God is pouring out his judgment on the earth. Two witnesses show up in Jerusalem, and they're not specifically named in Revelation. And they prophesy, and they speak, they testify against the earth for all the things that the earth people have done, but also speak of God. God is pouring out his judgment, but he's also providing a way out for people. And they're not named, but if you continue, it says, "There are 2 olive trees and 2 lampstands standing before the God of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. These have power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of the prophecy. They have power over the waters to turn into blood and to strike the earth with plagues as often as they desire." Now, it can be that these are just 2 messengers from God. They're not named, so it could be that. But if you look at what happens with them, they have a consuming fire that they can call forth, which, if you think about it, brings you back to Elijah when he calls the fire from heaven with the prophets of Baal. And then they have the power to shut off the heavens, which Elijah prayed for no rain for 3 years, and there was no rain, and then he prayed again, and there was rain. And then they have the power over the waters to turn them to blood and to strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire. The plagues and the waters turning to blood, does that bring to mind anyone? Moses. So I think there's clues in there. Could be wrong. Could just be witnesses. Other people say Moses and Enoch. But it seems to be pointing to Elijah and Moses being the two witnesses that come just before Jesus' second coming to testify what's coming, to testify what's happening, and to provide people a way out. So that's kind of an aside, but in the first coming, he's talking about John the Baptist. And I think that Elijah is coming the second time. Here they say that the disciples understood that he spoke to them of John the Baptist. So this all happens as they're coming down the mountain. But as soon as they get down the mountain and this conversation gets done, fascinating confrontation takes place. Verse 14, it says, "And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him, saying, 'Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely. For he often falls into the fire and is often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him.'" If you flip over to Mark chapter 9, it's got a parallel account of this encounter. Starting in verse 14. "And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him, greeted him. And he asked the scribes, 'What are you discussing with them?' Then one of the crowd answered and said, 'Teacher, I brought you my son, who is a mute spirit. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashing his teeth, becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not.'" So, do you see how this can be interpreted as they're up on the mountain, there's this great thing going on, and then as soon as they come down, Satan kicks him in the teeth, confronts him with this awful scene. There's this boy who's in terrible straits. He's described as epileptic at one point, but that's a modern word for what is going on. Some of the symptoms he's having is similar to what epilepsy now, but it's clear that he is demon-possessed, and he has been for a long time. He's ill, he's suicidal, he's got all this stuff going on. He's thrown down into the fire and into the water. He's foaming at the mouth, all from a demon. This is moments, seemingly not long after Jesus has just shown his glory to the world. The same way with us. And sometimes this happens where we've had these great experiences and then we run smack dab into pain. We were up in New York this week and had a great time. Just knew we were doing the Lord's work while we were there. And then we get back on the highway and wound up taking hours longer than planned. Was in pain on the way home and trying to stay awake. Just exhausted and in pain. And you can take it as, why is Satan stealing this from me? Why is God allowing me to suffer now? But that's the paradigm that we have to shift around. We have to change our thinking. Because if God allows it, if God has given us this view, this understanding, this ability, it's not just for us. Christianity is never a self-centered religion. It is for us, but it's also to be used. Paul talks about being poured out like a drink offering. That thought just has always stuck in my mind. Our life is like the wine in a pitcher. And the drink offering would be poured on the altar as something else was being burned. Usually it was an animal being consumed completely. And they would take the wine and just pour it out on the fire. so that it would be burned up really quickly into fumes that then go up to heaven. That's the picture of our life here, serving Jesus. If we come back from a retreat, or if we've just had a great church service, or we worship song in the car, and then we run into traffic, it's so that we can use whatever God just gave us for his glory. It's not so we're thwarted. It's not to hold us back. It's so that we bring Jesus and that glory into that situation and change the whole dynamic. In 2 Corinthians, excuse me. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18, and Paul writes, "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in the mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image, from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord." From glory to glory. Does that idea challenge you? Compare how you feel about your life and a life that is said to be from glory to glory. Does it seem like we're going from glory to glory? Some days I feel like I'm going from struggle to struggle, from failure to failure, from disappointment to disappointment. But that's about me. It's not about the Lord. Jesus comes down off of this mountain, having just had this wonderful experience showing his glory. And he's smacked in the face by the complete opposition of Satan, the failure of man. And he doesn't run away. He just goes right into it and changes things and heals. When we come down and when we've charged up, when we've seen the glory, when our life has been changed by Jesus, we're not supposed to just stop there. If we come back from that, if we come out of a transforming time and we're faced with opposition, we're exactly where we're supposed to be. It's not bad, it's good. Because then we can bring Jesus to people. But what does the Mark account say is going on as they get there, as Jesus arrives? There's a boy who's in terrible shape, who's suffering, who's lost. And his disciples, there's the three on the mountain. The rest, what are they doing? They're arguing with the scribes. The scribes have evidently taken their inability to heal this man as an opening. And they're attacking the disciples. And in response, the disciples are sticking up for themselves. They're arguing. We can do this. We are still great. We are still awesome. Which makes sense in the flesh. But does that do anything for the boy? The boy is still sitting there, demon-possessed, suffering from with a condition that seems like epilepsy. Both the disciples and the opposition are arguing with each other on the human level. No one is looking for God. No one is crying out for God. No one is is seeking the one who can actually make a difference. And Jesus' response, as a result, is quite striking. Verse 17 says, "Then Jesus answered and said, 'O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me.'" Why are they having a problem? Have you looked at this before and wondered why they can't heal this guy? They're like, we're disciples of Jesus. We should be able to heal. They've healed other people. They've seen Jesus heal thousands. And they're stuck here. Jesus gives us the answer in that verse, and then in verse 20. "So Jesus said to them, 'Because of your unbelief, for assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting.'" As Jesus is on the mountain, interesting picture. He's on the mountain, and he's encountering Moses and Elijah. There's this great interaction with God. Shekinah glory, the glory cloud of God goes over and speaks. Brings to mind, we talked about last week, when Moses is up on Mount Sinai, and the cloud passes over him. What is the rest of Israel doing while Moses is on the mountain? They're making the golden calf. They're having these terrible pagan ceremonies because they don't trust God because he's been gone. Jesus here is on the mountain Transfiguration. And while he's gone, God is speaking. These wonderful things are being done. His disciples, his people, seem to lose sight of Jesus in the process. He says they have unbelief. He says they're not praying and fasting, essentially. And when he comes back, they're arguing with people. There's this great need, but the only people who are there that can provide the need and show them Jesus are caught up in the world. They're wasting their time. They're just like the Israelites, just in a slightly different way. The Israelites were worshiping a false god and drinking and carrying on, worldly stuff. The disciples are doing the same thing. You can't tell us we're bad. Jesus is going to, they're arguing. Jesus says it doesn't work because you don't have faith. Do you know that we don't have to argue with people if they don't like Jesus? We don't have to convince people. We don't have to get into screaming matches if they don't understand the morality of the Bible. Jesus is going to come back and take care of that. Do we have faith that he's going to do that? We talked about how denying yourself, taking up the cross, and following him is the simple formula for bringing Jesus to the world. The disciples were offended by what the scribes are saying, so they're arguing. And they stop there. If we want to make a difference to whatever is brought before us, Jesus says, have faith, but also have discipline. You know, we can all go one way or the other, where it's all faith. Yes, I trust God. going to sit here. I trust God. Or it's all discipline. It's all about me, my will. But Jesus says, have faith, but also keep your discipline on me, keeping your eyes on me. Pray and fast. And then we can work together, deny yourself, and take up your cross. It's interesting that at least in Matthew, the boy is called an epileptic. And we have the same two possible extremes when dealing with illness. And he's throwing himself in the fire. He's trying to destroy himself. He's suicidal. And you have some parts of the church that say it's all natural. There's no such thing as demon possession. It's just, this is natural and we just need medication. And then we have the other parts of the church that is all spiritual. It's all demon possession. You just need to pray out your sickness. If you go through the Gospels, you get both. You have those who are ill. There's a man blind from birth, where Jesus rebukes his disciples for trying to figure out the spiritual nature behind what's going on. The man's just blind. The world is fallen. There's going to be illness and sickness in this world. But you also have situations like this where he could be diagnosed in our modern world with a lot of conditions. But Jesus comes in and just says, he is demon-possessed. There's a spirit. And he casts him out, and the boy is made well. There's both the effects of sin and the effects of oppression in the world today. And our job is to simply follow Jesus in encountering that, accepting both our possibilities. Mark adds more to the account. If you go over to Mark 9, you have the great discussion. You have people arguing while someone's suffering. And then one man, this boy's father, breaks through and kneels before Jesus. Kneeling is a sign of worship, a sign of complete submission. So you got all these people worried about the worldly stuff. And the one guy breaks through to Jesus, the one who can fix things. And in Mark, it asked the question, Jesus asked, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Verse 23 says, Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Isn't that a wonderful verse? Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. None of us believe perfectly. If we did, our lives would look different. But if we encounter Jesus and on this journey, continue to ask just like the Father did, I believe, help me with my areas of unbelief. You know they're there. I know they're there. I really need help. That's where Jesus can work. If you're struggling with some portion of the faith, if you don't understand something in the faith or in its application, take it to the Lord and just say, Lord, I don't understand. I believe in you. Help me with my areas of unbelief. I don't understand why I'm not healed. I don't understand why I can't heal people like Paul did. help me with my unbelief. That's been kind of my repeated verse, my life verse, through my time from when I first had that little glimpse of Jesus and thought, okay, I trust you, Lord. Like this much. Help me trust you more. Because it's not about wrapping our heads around things. It's him helping us tear down strongholds in our lives through the obedience of the Lord. Him showing us the answers that we need. And him giving us more faith as we continue to follow him. If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Do we believe that? Right? I believe, help me with my unbelief. When Jesus saw the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him, and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Remember the 2 Corinthians verse? From glory to glory. Glory of the mountaintop. And then glory as Satan is defeated, and this man who had no hope for his child, this boy who was suffering immensely, is healed just like that. Glory to glory. If you're suffering today, there's glory in it. There's glory to be found. It just might not look like we expect. Jesus is charging us, is showing us great things, is so that we can go into this world and free people from oppression. We can lead people to eternal salvation, away from eternal punishment. The greatest glory in all of history is Jesus leaving the greatest glory in all of history to come down and be nailed to a dirty cross and made fun of and spat upon for us. That's the greatest glory. Is that our expectation for our lives? I have to be honest, in my mind, I always think when it's easy, that's when God's working. When I see things that I like, that's when God is working. When things are going well for me, that's when God is working. Anybody else with me? I mean, it's just us. But honestly, it could be when demon-possessed people are thrown at us and they have no hope and there's nowhere else to go and people are arguing all over the place and there's division amongst God's people and there's no other person but us to deal with it. That's when we're on. That's what we've been prepared for. And that's when, if we're faithful, we could be the one to bring Jesus to that person and we see glory. It challenges my mind, but isn't that what Jesus is saying here? He's showing us. He lives it out so that he can then turn and say, "This is what I did. You do the same thing. You're a servant. Are you any better than your master?" It's like when Jesus at the Last Supper washes the feet of his creations. The dirty, stinky, nasty feet. And then turns around and says, "You do the same thing." I'm sorry, Jesus. I want to be the one when you say, you do the same thing, to be sitting on the throne. That's my idea of glory. What's your idea of glory? What's your idea of service to the Lord? If you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Do we believe that? Is our vision of what a mountain moving looks like preventing us from living that out? Do you understand what I mean? I have this vision of what God's work in this world looks like. There's lots of dancing, lots of parties, lots of ease. And Jesus says, I went to the cross. I was rejected by those who love me, or those closest to me. I came to my own, and my own rejected me. They chose sin and nailed me to the cross and swore that I was not the Messiah. Now go ahead. Follow me. Deny yourself. Deny your vision of what a mountain moving looks like. And take up the cross. Now don't forget, I know this is challenging. Don't forget what the end is. We go back to the Transfiguration. The glory, seeing so clearly the glory of God. It's only us that get to see the glory of God. And it's only us that get to hear God speak from heaven. And it's only us that get to have that intimacy with God himself. And that is what makes it worth it. But it's challenging. So that's why we have to have faith. And that's why we have to have discipline. And that's why I have to day by day deny self, take up cross, and follow him to get to the glory. I'm so grateful that the Lord allowed this to be all written down, because in my flesh, this makes no sense to me. I just want to eat cake. I just want things to be easy. But Jesus says, no, it can be easy for you, but that way leads to destruction. If you want glory, God to be glorified, if you want Jesus to go forth, if you want those who are headed to destruction to be saved, if you want the poor demon-possessed boy to be healed, it's going to be challenging, but it's going to be worth it. Are you willing to deny yourself, take up the cross, and follow me? Despite what it looks like to our eyes. If you are, you'll see glory. Do we trust in that? This is where you say, I believe, help me with my unbelief. And we will stop there.